Hooray!
So we are now live, broadcasting across the interwebs through the galactic universe at some particular point in time when people have the technology to receive these things. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Friday, which means it is time for Friday with Friends, and today my special guest is Milbre Burch. Yay!
Hooray! How nice to see you again.
It's good to see you too. We've been seeing a lot of each other lately, which is really kind of cool. I like it a lot, actually.
We have, but we don't get a lot of chit-chat time in, so this is really lovely.
That is a true statement. We do not get a lot of chit-chat. So in case people join us who have no idea who you are, we've got 2 people watching so far. Please tell us who you are and where you're from, because that's always lovely to hear and see.
Hello and welcome.
And also, if you have, it's Lisa Wilcox.
Hooray!
I hear you on my galactic end. Excellent. We like that. So yeah, it's so you've been doing this amazing show called
whatever it is.
I sing.
Sometimes I sing.
Sometimes I sing. Yes, which is an incredible piece, and it's based on true events, and it's all about abuse, which we don't normally get into here. So Laura Blyman Isolde, which is a very cool name, I have to say.
Names. Yes, indeed.
Used to be Miss James, who is my daughter's kindergarten teacher or pre-K teacher.
Huzzah.
And she is absolutely brilliant. Now she lives in PA, you know, and as my niece says out in New York, she says nothing good happens in Pennsylvania. Except for Miss James, or now Mrs. Laura Blyman Isolde. Isolde is such a cool name.
Educators and librarians are our heroes, so
they are.
Thank you for being
They are. So tell all 3 people here that about there are going to be more that watch it later. I'll tell you that. So so you're when I first heard you tell this story, you told like a little bit about it, which just blew my mind. And then when I heard you present the whole story, it was just fascinating and brilliant and heartbreaking and you know, all of those emotions that go along with things such as abuse. So first of all, how did you find the story?
Okay, thank you for asking that question, because this is a project very close to my heart, which came to me when I was a late-breaking graduate student. I got my master's and then my PhD in my late 50s. I guess my PhD when I was 60. And
it was like 2 years ago, right?
Yes, indeed. My professors, most of whom were younger than I was, understood that I was coming into the theater and performance studies program as a solo performer and a storyteller. So every professor I had kind of nudged me in an interesting direction that I might not have gone if I hadn't been in that particular creative crucible of late in life graduate school. So I'm very grateful for that. One of my professors, Cheryl Black, a dear friend as well as a mentor, is a Susan Glaspell scholar. Glaspell, a triple threat, a short story writer, novelist, and playwright who lived in the early part of the 20th century. And so I got to study both her plays and then under the same professor, the study of dramaturgy, which has one definition as the investigation of the story world that a playwright has created. That's part of what dramaturgy is. And so for that class, we chose play, and we did research on the production history of it, but more importantly, what was going on in the life of the playwright and what was going on in the world that the playwright was creating, which was, in her case, 1901, rural Iowa. Glaspell was born in the 1870s in Davenport, Iowa, and even as a teenager, she was already writing social columns for the local newspaper. And then she went to college, which was virtually unheard of for a woman of her time. And when she graduated from Drake University, she came home and got a job for the Des Moines Daily News. And this is 1900. This is a woman reporter whose beat included the State House in Iowa.
So that must have been a huge barrier to cross, I would imagine.
I mean,
Do you know
She
how many
must
other?
have been one brilliant, persuasive woman.
Right. Because how many other? Do you know how many other female journalists there were at that time?
I have not done that research, but I'm going to guess
Like a handful.
the ones that were covering the State House, probably you could count on one hand.
Yeah.
So
I bet,
while
yeah.
she was doing that beat, there was a murder case outside Indianola, Iowa, in which a farm wife was accused of killing her husband, who was known to be abusive both to his wife and to his children. 5 of the 9 children lived in the house when the murder took place, but it was the wife they chose to charged with the murder, and Glassell covered the case. She filed 26 stories in the course of the murder trial, and the woman was convicted and sent to the state penitentiary, Anamosa State Penitentiary in Anamosa, Iowa. And she spent a year there, during which neither the matron of the women's ward nor the warden thought she was guilty. So there was some question about whether she was covering for one of her children for having whacked the husband with an axe a couple of times, once with the sharp end and once with the dull end, not killing him outright. And he did say, I don't feel very good. And then he died about 10 hours later without ever saying, why'd you hit me, honey? Or, none of those things came out. But
wow.
Her conviction was overturned after a year in prison, and she got a new trial and a change of venue. And that jury was hung. They could not decide whether or not they should convict her. And after that, the county attorney said, okay, she's in her 60s. Everybody knew he was a bastard. She's not in danger of anybody else. We're not going to do this again. And so she was let go and lived the rest of her life with one of her adult children. Glassell, meanwhile, quit newspapering when the woman was convicted. Right. She turned her attention to short stories and novels, and left Iowa and went to Greenwich Village and also to Provincetown, Massachusetts, where she was a founder of the Provincetown Playhouse, which was one of the first little theaters in America devoted to new American plays. And Glassell and a young man who was walking around with a suitcase full of stories that nobody wanted to put on stage, his name was Eugene O'Neill, were the 2 most prolific playwrights in the Provincetown Players. And she fictionalized the murder trial that she had covered and wrote this one-act masterwork called Trifles. And then, because she was so savvy and understood that more people would read a published short story than see a play or read a play, she adapted her work a second time, first from journalism to a play, then from a play to a short story, and published in 1917 A Jury of Her Peers. And this is an ironic title, as was Trifles, because, of course, in 1917, women didn't have the vote, so no women were on a jury. So there was impossible for a woman to have a jury of her peers.
Right.
And in that short story and play, you actually never see the woman who has been accused of the murder. She's already in the county jail. And that was a theatrical convention that Glassell used several times, of having important players not appear in the play. So I studied the play, and then I did a dramaturgical notebook that was about 15 pounds of research. And I handed it over to my professor, and she, knowing I was a solo performer who sometimes used dramatic monologue, said, now you need to write a piece in the voice of the woman we never see and never hear from.
Wow.
So I started that work as her student, and read it for the first time at a conference on American drama, and had had a chance to read it in front of Glassell scholars, and thought, well, they're either going to kill me or they're going to say this is okay with them. And they loved hearing from Minnie Wright, the name of the character, because no one had ever heard her voice.
Right.
So, I went on to produce it a couple of times, first at the University of Missouri, where I was a grad student. We did a production called Justice Served, 3 short plays about women confronting violence. And that program included Trifles, and the second act of it was Sometimes I Sin, my monodrama. But we also had, before that, I asked a fellow grad student, who's a woman of color, to adapt Zora Neale Hurston's short story Sweat, which is also about domestic violence. And she did so. So we had 3 plays. The first from Zora Neale Hurston's world. The second, actually a race-conscious casting that included an African-American woman in this play set in Iowa in 1900. And then me as Minnie Wright in Animals of State Penitentiary, speaking to the young reporter whose stories may have helped to land me there. So that's how that piece developed. And since then, I have performed it either as a standalone piece or as the second act of Trifles with a college production. I did that too at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, where a friend of mine was directing Trifles and had me come up and be the second act. And I also perform it with a spoken word version of A Jury of Her Peers, my own adaptation of that piece, with the help of a dramaturg friend who helped me adapt it. So now let's go back. Last year, there was an artist project grant opportunity through the Orange County Arts Commission. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in Orange County, North Carolina. And I applied to get a project grant that would allow me to either perform live or to share screenings of Sometimes I Sing in support of the work of 3 agencies in Orange County who were providing direct support for survivors of domestic abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking, any kind of gendered violence. And I got the grant. So with Simon's help, I did an event on April 8th, which was in recognition of Sexual Assault Awareness Month through the Carolina Women's Center at University of North Carolina. And our co-hosts were the Chapel Hill Police Crisis Unit, which sends social workers out to talk with domestic violence survivors, and also the Compass Center for Women and Families, which is one of the shelters and also education and sustainability providers for women who are starting a new life, hopefully away from their abuser. So through the Orange County Arts Commission and these 3 agencies, Carolina Women's Center, Chapel Hill Police, the Crisis Unit, and Compass Center, I've now had a chance to do several events, including for the North Carolina Department of Justice, for some women's studies undergrad scholars, just did that now at UNC, and then next week I'll be doing it for the racial subcommittee of the Wake County Domestic Violence Task Force. And each time there's been a panel talking about the resources available to survivors, and also putting a link between this piece I wrote based on a 100-year-old play and short story, and how survivors of domestic violence are still treated today. And alas and alack, they're still sometimes sent to prison for defending themselves and killing their abusers.
But you just sent me a link of this person that has been released.
Yes, there was a New York Times article recently about a documentary that's helped with the release of some folks who have been convicted of killing an abusive spouse or partner.
Yeah.
So, and that article also points out that women of color are more at risk for lethality when it comes to domestic violence, and also more at risk for being sent to prison if they fight back with their abuser. So even though Glaspell did not address race in her play, last year, shortly before, I guess it was the fall of 2019, Patricia Bryan, who wrote a book-length study about the actual murder case called Midnight Assassin, a Murder in the Heartland. She is a UNC law professor here and was one of my resources for writing my piece. She and I went to see a play, student production of Trifles, which was directed by a young woman named Rasul Jahan, and she double cast the play with a white cast set in Iowa in the early 20th century and a black cast set in Mississippi in the 1960s. So there's one moment when all of the characters are on stage at the same time, and then they go out again. And so her point is that the story is still a contemporary story, and that Black bodies are also at risk for domestic violence.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for asking. It's something
You're welcome.
very dear to my heart. And
Yeah.
even though my grant project is ending at the end of this month, the American Association of University Women, the local chapter here, Orange, Durham, and Chatham County, and the statewide organization of the American Association of University Women are hosting a screening with a panel that will include a survivor. So that's going to happen.
Wow. That's going to be heavy.
Yeah.
That's going to be heavy. So the other work that we've been doing together has been with Miss Heather Forrest and Miss Laura Sims as well.
Are they kindergarten teachers? Is that why we're calling them Miss Laura and Miss Heather?
No, it's just because they're my friends as well. Yeah, Ms. Laura Sims and Mrs. Heather Forrest. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So doing that whole Rapunzel thing, which was phenomenal as well.
Well, actually, really you were helping with the tech stuff on two of our joint presentations, both our Hans Christian Andersen show that we did together.
Right, and there's that too. Yeah.
Virtual storytelling festival. And then last January when Heather and Laura and I did Rapunzel's Tower. Followed by a seminar about that story. I'll let down you here. So that was thrilling to have somebody at the driver's seat because what happens if I'm driving the Zoom.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, when you've got three people and there's all this other stuff going on, it's good to have a driver.
Right.
It's good to have the designated driver.
Laura and Heather are what I call two of the New York goddesses of storytelling, and they were the beginning of my work as a storyteller. I was really one of the second wave of storytellers that came through the National Storytelling Festival. Laura and Heather have been mentors of mine really all my professional life, and so now have earned friendship and camaraderie on the level of equals is pretty for this girl.
I know. It's kind of like me and Odds Bocking, where we're like, when I first started telling stories, it's the same thing. He was just like, oh, and then, I mean, you know what I'm like. I'm a cheeky so-and-so. And when it was when we had that big crash and like there was no money for anybody and money was drying out in the libraries and all that kind of stuff. And Odds decided that he was going to do the library circuit, which he hadn't done in years. And he joined the library circuit, and I was just like, what the whack? That's like, any gig that I was going to get, it's like, oh, Odds is performing this year. We've had Simon several times. Let's get Odds.
Right, right.
I shot him an email. I phoned him up and left him a message saying, what the heck are you doing? Go back to New York. Right? And I mean, it wasn't quite like that, but it was very tongue-in-cheek and like, you're taking on my business, dude. What's going on? And we've become fast friends since then. I mean, we bump into each other every once in a while, but we're best.
Wonderful work.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. He recently did this Danica of the Rose, which is music by Dvorak. Wow. It's folk music. And these opera singers got in touch with him and said, hey, could you write some stories around these folk tunes? Wow. And so they sang in Czech and he told these stories. And it was just unbelievable. I mean, I haven't watched all of it yet. I've watched bits of it, but I'm going to watch, I've got to go and find it because I want to watch it because it sounds absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And then he asked me to do some voice work with him. He created this adult play. And that's still, we're not sure what's going to happen with that. I probably shouldn't have mentioned that. But we'll take that back in. But that was a lot of fun. But yes, and anyway, so yeah, it's great. And I convinced him to come to this. So, talking about abuse and everything, there's this summer camp that I've been doing for, it's getting on for 20 years now. And it's a summer camp where these kids come from incredibly challenged backgrounds, challenged in all the ways that you can imagine and the ones that you don't want to imagine. Right. And it only runs for 1 week and it's at the end of summer. And we basically the Children's Literacy Foundation gave this grants to this camp, and so I delivered a bunch of books to this camp, which we were looking after at the library that I worked at the time. And I was like, well, you should have storytelling too. And so the organization Cliff they said, well, let me hear you tell stories. And I'm like, oh, all right. And so I told some stories, and they were like, yeah, you can do that. Let's do that. Let's wrap this up together. And so I went and told stories from them, and I was like, I'm going to do this every single year, and I never charged them for it. You know, I go down at like 5 o'clock. Well, it depends. When I used to live nearer there, I used to go down at 5 o'clock and hang out with the kids, and we'd have supper, and then we'd spend until 9 o'clock at night telling stories to the campers there, to these kids. And some of the people that told stories with me dropped out. And I was like, Odds is just down the road. We're like good friends now. I'm gonna just ask him, right? I said, there's no money in it. He said, I'll think about it and see. And he thought about it. He says, I'll come this year. And I was like, all right. And he's been going every year since. And these kids have no idea that they're getting the quality that they're getting, right?
Right.
And it's just phenomenal to see these kids just fall in love with him. And Angela Klingler was one of the storytellers that used to come, and then she became a grandma, and she's just a professional grandma now. I haven't seen hide nor hair of her since then. And Papa Joe came one year, and we've got Karen Pillsworth. Yeah, Karen Pillsworth in New York. She's been coming these last few years as well. So we've got a really good crew of like top. Are
you still commuting to it, or did you go and stay?
Well, no. So it's only the one night.
Oh, I see.
So there's Wednesday night in the middle of the week is the storytelling night. It's basically Wednesday is when they do a lot of literacy like type of events, because most of it is like crafts and sports and stuff. And so we get together, and Karen's got family up in Vermont, so she ties in the family visit with coming up to Vermont to do the storytelling, and it's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, it's great. And we're not sure what's going to happen this year, but we're hoping that it's going to happen. And I've told them that, you know, no matter what, I'll be there to tell stories just because. But I do want to, some people have been dropping comments in, so I want to go through these very quickly. One of the first comments that Mo Reynolds said, hi, Simon and Milbre, love your stories, Milbre. So she's happy to be here. And Andrea Cammons is here as well. So she's excited to be here.
I love the image Andrea has. We have a deer herd in our backyard, and right now there are 2 baby fawns that come with their mom, and occasionally they come by without their mom, and when they get spooked, they're like, oh, it's really fun.
We actually had so we get deer like coming, so we're one road, so the road behind us up here is the main street of New London, New Hampshire, right? And it's kind of a busy road. But on like the whole town is surrounded by woods, basically. And I think the population in here is 4,000, 5,000 people, something like that. It's not a big place at all. But we get deer coming through. And one day there's some deer down towards the forest, and mama deer's like watching her little ones cross the road. And then this car comes down the road, and they all start running back, but there's one deer stuck on this side of the road because it didn't run fast enough.
Right.
And so I'm getting my camera out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like keep coming traffic. And I mean, you tell the little fawn is absolutely petrified. And the mom's like, oh my gosh, don't get run over. Don't go. Wait till the traffic stops. But right. Yeah, it's so cool. So cool.
You know, I was in November of 2019, I was doing a little short tour in New England, and my husband Berkeley came with me, and we went out to see Sally Rogers and Howie Burson, and I did a house there. And then I drove around with Sally to attend some of her events, and she with me, and we were driving along, and suddenly, boom, this small deer jumps into the road with this. Oh, I didn't. And traffic on both sides stopped, and it kept going. But it was as though it had dropped from the sky, just right there in front of us.
They do. They really do. They're crazy animals. So Janice is talking about you and Heather and Laura there. So I think Janice should also be an honorary member of the Royal Highnesses.
No honorary about it. She is a highness.
She is a highness all by herself. Dale Dimmis, I love hearing the whole back in contact for the answer. Yeah, right.
If anybody's interested in seeing, sometimes I sing in October when it goes up virtually. put your email in the chat, and hey, Antonio, and I can put you on the list and send that link. So if you'd like to see, sometimes I sing with a panel afterwards, then just communicate with me.
Yeah, put it in the chat here, because we'll be able to see it, but it'll stay up on Facebook or YouTube if people contact us through YouTube, and we can grab those emails from there. If you're on YouTube, then send me a personal message, and I'll make sure that Milbre gets it. Just put a note in there to make sure that I know what it's for. Because if you just send me your email address, I'm like in 24 hours, my brain may be like, what's this about? Because I am a bear of little brain. So yes, and so you don't just do these powerful shows. Although, all right, so I got to backpedal here a bit, because everything that you do is like
stuff too. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no. So the work that I do, right, it's folk and fairy tales, and I bring a lot of depth and everything, but I also bring a lot of humor, and also somebody actually said that I was irreverent sometimes. Yeah. And I wear that, and I own it, and I kind of like it. Whereas you're not at all irreverent with folk. I don't think so. Not really. Actually, I think the first work of yours I heard was before I was a storyteller, and it was after 9/11. I mean, when I say that, it was before I was a professional storyteller doing this for a living, because I was still telling stories. But before I was a professional storyteller, it was after 9/11. And for some strange and bizarre reason, the CD that you made after that popped up. And I was...
Stories for a Wounded World, that one?
Yeah. And I was like everybody else in the whole planet. I was gutted when that happened, when the planes crashed. I was in Boston. I was in Waltham. We had a big screen TV in the office that I was working with corporate America at that particular time. And somebody said, someone's just flown a plane into one of the Twin Towers. And I was like, no, they haven't. Like, that's stupid. Nobody runs a plane. They're huge. Why would anybody do that? And, then the inevitable, well, not the inevitable, but then what happened. And it was just unbelievable. And your CD popped up not that long after that. And it was something that I shared with, we didn't have 2 kids, and we only had Aiden at that particular point. But it was such a good thing. So your work is always steeped in some sort of healing. A lot of your work is, at least the stuff that I've seen you do. There's always some approach to healing within that.
Well,
talk about that, Milbre.
Actually, I want to share 2 little stories from that album before we're all done, because I think it's appropriate to do that. Golly, I like to think of myself as irreverent sometimes too, but perhaps not in the work that we're talking about specifically.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So I think there's so much about grief that our culture does not acknowledge.
Yeah.
That part of my work as someone whose early life was shaped by losing someone very dear to me, was a young person. It's always been important for me to talk about loss and resilience. I'm sort of on a one-woman mission to say, America, you're really broken in the way you grieve. And I feel like we've been in the endless war because we'd rather get angry and go after somebody than say our hearts are broken.
Yeah.
And I'm actually reading a book that I really recommend by Megan Devine, Devine, called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And it's specifically addressing the brokenness of our societal response to grief, which is basically a bum's rush to get better because we're not comfortable with your distress.
So what was this woman's first name again?
Megan, M-E-G-A-N, Divine, D-E-V-I-N-E. And the book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay.
It's
And,
okay. All right, sorry.
I feel like I've spent the entire pandemic saying to various groups I've been Zooming with, this is called a global pandemic. What you're feeling is called grief.
Yeah, right.
Let's just acknowledge that before we start saying how much we're eating and drinking and ignoring our, lying on the face and the carpet, which is all of which are appropriate.
And sometimes we don't vacuum the carpet before we do that.
So, in a way, that's what that album was about, saying human beings hurt each other every day. And how can we look beyond the sound bites that other people and learn whatever it is we're supposed to learn, because I believe that every story that was ever told is meant to teach us how to be human in a hostile world.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. Absolutely. Or at least most of them, because I've read some stories from harsh, that stories that come from harsh environments or cultures that live in harsh environments. Mm-hmm. And some of those stories they're very harsh stories. Mm-hmm. There's some Aboriginal stories which I wouldn't ever share, not because necessarily that they're Aboriginal, but because they are they're so, I don't find there's any healing in them whatsoever, because a lot of the, it's, so you articulate what you do, and you're on a one woman mission of working with grief, and I'm also on a mission, but it's not quite the same way. I just, I want to make people happy. I want to show people that, there is a lot of stuff out there in this world that's awful. And so why can't I go, like the other day, Friday, I went to a school, I did 2 in-person presentations, and I got, it was, the kids were laughing their faces off. There were faces all over the lawn. I had to pick them up and hand them all back to the kids. And the teachers were the same. It was just absolutely brilliant, and, we're talking about don't get on devices over the summer because it was to do with summer reading and all that kind of stuff. But, these kids, they struggle with so much. And, I'm talking with teachers about doing the whole Zoom thing. And they, before they didn't see into the kids' homes, right? The kids would show up, and then all of a sudden they get, oh, well, maybe I should reevaluate what I'm thinking about this particular child because of this particular environment that this particular child is in. And it's, some teachers never saw that or never got that. And I
But let's keep in mind that laughter is also a release of tension.
Yeah, it is.
We have an enormous amount of tension in our body after this last year. And any way we can release that is good. And when people laugh, they also open to one another. So, but I don't want you to think grief is not all about sadness, though it is about
No, it's not. No.
Grief is processing a life-changing loss.
Right.
And that takes time. And it takes a container in which it's okay to sit with the grief. And if we can find ways to sit with the grief, as opposed to trying to fix it, which of course you can't do, there's no fix a life-changing loss, then that person does feel better because they feel affirmed and not crazy.
Right. Yes.
So there's joy, and then there's the satisfaction of knowing you haven't lost your mind. It just feels like you have in early grief. It feels like you've lost your mind. And it affects you physically. And for people to act as though that's not the case is to deny an entire aspect of what it means to love someone.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
We're going to lose every single person we love eventually, or they're going to lose us. And if we don't have a healthy way to sit with this life-changing loss, then we're going to go to war with each other.
Yeah. Or even with us, even with ourselves, right?
Is pushing us to be short-tempered and unhappy and drink too much and do these things that make our wicks even easier to light.
Yes. I like that. Yeah, I read something the other day and I paraphrased it. I wrote down, to show and admit that you mess up is liberating for the. So this was actually. So this kid is maybe 20. He's right around 20, right? And he's a son of a friend of mine, Liam Guntlock. And
great name, another great name.
Yeah, I know, right? It's better than Brooks. Simon Brooks. I mean, you know, it's like, anyway, I'm not going to go there. So anyway, he said, I'm paraphrasing this. He says, because he does the Diablos. He does clowning with Diablos. And he's absolutely brilliant. I haven't seen him perform in years. And then I got to watch this video yesterday. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so good.
And
I
are
knew that.
those devil sticks, or are they little clay figures of the devil, which is what I think of a Diablo as?
No, they're like yo-yos. You have a stick with a string between it, and you, and then you flip them up. And what he does with them is just unbelievable. But he says, you know, if you mess up in front of, because he's talking about the Fourth War, which of course us as storytellers, we crash through that all the time, right? Me with great abundance and flair. But anyway, one of the things he talks about is when you're making a mistake, is to show and admit that you mess up or make a mistake is liberating for the audience as well as for the performer. Allowing yourself to mess up, make mistakes is okay. And I think that a lot of that is related to, you know, can be related to grief. It's okay to be grieving over something, right? It's okay to feel this way. And it's okay to acknowledge that this is your grief, and you don't have to hold on to it quite as tightly, right? You can put it in your back pocket and it's always going to be there, but you don't have to.
Right. Eventually, you can put it in the back pocket. For a while, right. It stays in the front pocket.
Oh yeah. It's like worn on your forehead.
Right.
Like a big amber, like a big zit. You know, it was. Anyway, or was it this side? I can't remember. Anyway, but yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question. What floats your boat about folk and fairy tales?
Oh, I never got over the fairy tales. I love them because
I know you do.
I think it's a different kind of listen. I have this hope that at some point I'm going to get to work with a brain scientist and see how the brain lights up when you're hearing an oral tradition tale, as opposed to a personal story, as opposed to some other kind of narrative. Because for me, the folk and fairy tales are the ones that let me into a deep listening trance.
Yeah.
And that I have a chance to experience a world outside my own limited, biased set of blinders and my own short, squinchy little life. You know? It lets me see the world of possibilities and imagination, and to have this imaginal connection with the audience where the story happens between the tongue of the teller and the ear of the listener. It's right. This shared imaginal space, and it causes people to breathe together and sometimes respond together, whether it's laughter or you know. Years ago, I was emceeing at the National Storytelling Festival for Heather Forrest's set, in which she did her piece, The Eye of the Beholder, which is Beauty and the Beast inside of Riquet of the Tuft. So two French fairy tales sort of inside of each other, all about seeing the beloved, recognizing the beloved in someone, whether it's their visage or, you know, seeing beyond their visage to the soul. And I'm listening to this story, and when it ended, I looked out. This was 10 on the Hill. Every person in the audience was leaning towards another person in the audience, and their bodies looked transparent. I could see tent poles behind them. They were not back yet. They were still in France, and it was like, oh my God. This is what fairy tales can do. Yeah,
right. Yeah. I live for those moments.
The other thing, as a listener, that was for me as an observer, but as a listener, years ago, it was actually the year that my husband and I were beginning to talk about, my husband to be and I were talking about the M word, you know, talking about marriage. And I was at the National Storytelling Conference at Washington Academy outside of Jonesboro, Tennessee, and Joya Timpanelli was there. And OMG, the experience of listening to Joya was one of the first times I ever understood how deep the story trance could be for the listener. She's telling Beauty and the Beast, actually.
There's some stories that do that, though.
Yeah.
Right?
And she's asking the audience, who is this beast that makes us leave our father's house? And I'm thinking, yeah, who is this beast? I'm thinking about getting married. Who is this beast who makes you leave your father's house? And she's telling the story, and she turns and she looks at me. And I left the space. I was in woods. It was night. I was a pool of water, and a deer came and drank from me. And then it was over, and she went on with the story, and I'm like, did that happen? Did that happen? Oh my God, did that happen? And afterwards, I'm like a puppy, like, oh, can I get up close to you and snuggle? And she said, oh, Milbre, she said, you have the face of a goddess. You really kept me going for a while there. And then she said, but don't forget, we're all farts. And she went, yes. She would only let me be a puppy so far, and that was like, get out of here, you know.
Yeah.
Don't put me on a pedestal. I'm just a storyteller.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because you know, I work with a lot with kids, and they're just like, dude, you're so great. You should be on like TV. And I was like, no, I'm just like the plumber down the street, except I'm not fixing your sink. I'm fixing your soul. I'm fixing your mind.
I'm fixing your psyche, not your sink.
Yeah. Yes, I like that. Yeah, and it's kind of funny because, you know, we're not rock stars, and we shouldn't act like rock stars, because all we are regular Joes just doing a job like everybody else, and our job is
conversation with an audience.
Yeah, in conversation.
We are co-creating this thing between us and the imaginations of the listener. Without them, we're just reciting.
Oh yeah, we're being self-indulgent farts.
Right.
That wasn't the word I was going to use, but I will use it.
She did. If Joya Timpanelli can use farts, we can use farts.
I know, right? I know. Hang on, we've got some more comments. So what do we got up here? What an incredible insight, says Mo. I wonder what has made us like this. I think it's just because we're a young country. It's America. I say us. America's a young country, right? And as a collective consciousness, it's still growing. And I think, you know, there's a lot to be said about that. I think that when America created itself, there is, you know, they talk about like America's such a young country, and America as we know it is. And there are a lot of growing pains that go with that. I mean, we're probably still we're in the late teens right now, maybe.
And we just got our driver's license, so we're really dangerous. Yes,
we can legally drink. So what is it? Frog Prince. The Frog Prince sends it to me as a classic. Yes, Change and Letting Go. Right. And one of the ones for me is the story from India, The Story Untold and the Song Unsung, which is one of my favorite stories to tell. And Rapunzel, actually. Rapunzel does that for me as a release story, because I don't tell the story as the old woman as being a witch. I tell her as being as a wise woman, a crone, Milbre. I hope you will get your fate. Yes, I know. I tried to. I tried to. There's no guarantees though. So Papa Joe, actually, he tells this story about dogs and their tail, like why they sniff people's bottoms and why they sniff bottoms. And it's because they used to go together in this club, right? And because their tails would always be wagging around, they would have to take their tails off and check them at the tail rack, right? And this cat decided to mess around with them. And so it called fire, and all the dogs fled, and they just grabbed whatever tails they had and stuck them back on. And they realized afterwards that their tails weren't their tails. And so they go around sniffing other dogs' bottoms to
have you got my tail? Have you got my tail?
Yeah, right. That's right. So there is healing in stories. Yes, there is. Yes. And Lisa also says, I'd love to see that research. So I think what's the guy's name? Kendall something, or somebody
Haven,
Kendall.
Haven. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, didn't he?
He's actually done some research with the narrative networks
But that's not with folk and fairy tales, though, right? That's just stories.
Well, I think he was using storytelling forms, oral storytelling forms, and he was manipulating them to see how the audience responded to if he tweaked it this way, if he tweaked it that way, if he tweaked it this way, if he tweaked it that way, whom did they have empathy for? And he was doing this work for the Defense Advanced Research Organization, which is the research arm of our Defense Department, which has been interested in how to create stories that impact people. And what's interesting is I do use
thanks, Andrea. Andrea just put the link to it. Yeah.
Yep, that's some of Kendall's work. I'm having a senior moment and can't think for the moment of the name of the fellow who has a short video about the work that he has done, checking your skin conductivity, your heart rate, your respiration while you're watching, and now some brain imaging while you're watching a story. Now, it wasn't a folktale, and it was an animated piece. So this is one of the things that got me thinking about it. But he also does work for DARPA. And one of the things DARPA is trying to figure out is how to counteract the jihadist narratives. You know, you should do this because of the, you know, wonderful things that are going to happen to you in
the afterlife. Yeah.
And so after seeing this video and reading Kendall's work and talking to Kendall about the work that he was doing, I happened to see an article in the New York Times that talked about how the Defense Department had decided to stop using snark as the identifying emotion in their videos to try and dissuade people from being extremists. And it's like, yeah, have you ever been to junior high? When is the last time you learned something from somebody saying something snarky to you? Are you effing What?
Yeah.
You know,
so what's interesting is that there's so much about of this stuff that we're starting to discover and learn, right? You know, like
that traditional peoples have known for a long time.
Right. Chinese medicine, right?
Indigenous storytellers, you know, it's like, yeah, we can heal bodies with this. It's sound vibration, and part of it is, you know, we've got the right song to help you. It's like, oh, I don't know how it works.
Yeah, right. It's fascinating. I love what we do. So Milbre, should we take a short break from what we're talking about? And do you want to tell a couple of stories, or a story, or whatever you want to?
Yeah. I want to tell these two little stories about I have two daughters who have been enormous.
God bless you.
For me. Yeah. And I have them in midlife. And so, as I said to a group earlier today, I'm here to tell you that the puberty menopause vector is not a pretty sight. Okay. Just saying. It's a little tricky. But both of my children have been incredible teachers, and are activists in their own rights in terms of really standing up for or thinking hard about how human beings can create systems that are more equitable, etc. So I live in Chapel Hill. I have done since 2018.
Before you start,
yes.
So some people I know listen to this with their kids in the room. Is this a story that's okay for kids?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right.
These are two stories that are about children, about the wisdom of children, actually.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
My older daughter, Katie Blake, has taught me quite a few things too, and is finishing up a global affairs master's degree at King's College in London, even as we speak. She's been an international relations a student of that, and working on policy and thinking about how the world works ever since she met Ishmael Bea, Laura Sims' adoptive son, who is the writer of A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier. So as a teenager, Katie Blake got to host him for some events in our town in Columbia, Missouri, and it really set her on a certain path that has led her towards wanting to figure out how help human beings work in the world in positive ways. My younger daughter, Elizabeth, is a poet and a filmmaker, and was quite an intense little bug as a small child, and had a lot to teach us at that point in her life too. And we were living in Chapel Hill 20 years ago when my kids were 4 and 7 years old. So we were there for 4 years, starting at that age for them. And so we were here when 9/11 happened, and we had taken the kids to the Montessori Community School that day. And my husband and I were working in our offices at home. He was getting his PhD in media history and visual journalism at the University of North Carolina. That's why we happened to live here at the time. And he came out to me and said, a plane just flew into one of the World Trade Centers. And then a few minutes later came out to say a second plane has flown into the second World Trade Center. And that's when we understood that we were under attack. Our kids were at school, and we got an email from the teachers saying that they weren't going to talk to the kids about what had happened that day until the children had come home and had a chance to talk with their families, but that they would be answering any questions the kids had the next day at school. Now, it was a Tuesday, and Tuesday was a mommy day at our house. I would go to school at the end of the school day and pick up one of my kids on Tuesday and then the other kid on Thursday, leaving the second child in daycare for a little while so that I could have private time with whoever's child it was a mommy day of. And on that day, it was 5-year-old Elizabeth's mommy day. But Berkeley and I really didn't want to leave each other's sides. So I took him along on mommy day. And Elizabeth doesn't like surprises. We went to the mall to get some ice cream before we were going back to school to get her sister. And as we stood in line to get ice cream, she said, I don't know what Daddy's doing here. What's Daddy doing on a mommy day? And I said, well, honey, some really sad and bad things happened today. Some bad guys, some bullies hurt a lot of people. And Daddy and I are feeling like we wanted to stay close to each other. She said, okay. And we got her ice cream. And we went back to school to pick up her sister. And Elizabeth ran into the community room and said, Katie Blake said bad guys and bullies really hurt a lot of people. And I grabbed her and took her out, and we talked more specifically with the kids about what had happened on our way home that night. You never really know what children do with these things. So a few months passed, and it was New Year's Day. We were driving out to Pittsburgh, which is a community out further in the country, and we were going to celebrate the new baby our friend Louise Omoto Kessel had with her husband, Holmes Graybeard, adopted a little boy whose skin color was different from their own. And they were having a party to introduce their son Jabo to the community, and we were going there. Now, we knew Louise because she's an activist and a storyteller, and she has a summer camp that my children had participated in going out to Pittsburgh, and so we knew each other's families. And the name of the land is the Clapping Hands Farm, and the mailbox is decorated with all kinds of different colors of handprints on it. So we passed the mailbox and we went down to the house, and there Louise, who's Japanese Jewish, had latkes and sushi, I think, for the celebration, and we met Jabo, and it was wonderful to welcome this child into our community. And then it was time to go home, so we drove back down the driveway, and we passed that mailbox with all those different colored handprints on it. And from the back seat, 5-year-old Elizabeth goes, idea, idea, idea. And I said, well, what's your idea, honey? She said, well, we could get mailboxes and paint them like all the peoples of the world. I said, yeah. And she said, we could get clothing and dress like all the peoples of the world. I said, uh-huh. And she said, we could take our house and paint it like all the peoples of the world. I said, yeah. She said, and then no harm would ever come to us. And she got quiet for a moment. And then she said, even the bad guys and the bullies could be on the mailboxes. May it be so, Elizabeth. May it be so.
Wow. Wow.
So, the other story I wanted to share was a year later, as I said, this child has had a lot to teach me over time. And now Elizabeth was 6, and we were headed to my brother in North Georgia for Thanksgiving. And one of the ways we traveled when the children were small was playing storytelling tapes and musical albums in our little minivan that we traveled in. I was a soccer mom. And so we were driving from Chapel Hill to North Georgia, and we were listening to an album that was produced by Bill Harley called I'm Gonna Let It Shine, which is a collection of freedom songs. And some of the singers are some of the original freedom singers. It's really a remarkable a cappella album, and I defy you to listen to it without singing along. So my kids and I are driving down the road. Now, my husband and I'm a Georgia girl married to a Mississippi boy, and we grew up in the Jim Crow South. So the time is very different by the time my children are young, and it's not different enough, but it is very different from how it was when we were growing up. And the girls and I are driving down the road, and we're singing along with this album. If you miss me at the back of the bus, look for me at the front of the bus. I'll be sitting right there. You know, I think the line is, if you miss me at the back of the bus, you can't find me nowhere. Coming up at the front of the bus, I'll be sitting right there. And the kids said, Mom, what's that mean? And I turned off the music, and I explained that when I was a child, people of color had to take the seats or stand in the back of the bus. They weren't allowed to sit in the front. Only white people could sit in the front. And they said, oh. Turn the music on again, and now we're singing about you're going to go my bail. And they said, Mom, what's that mean? And I turned it off, and I explained that sometimes when your country has laws that are wrong, that you protest against them, and sometimes you get arrested in your protest, and you're kept in a jail till somebody comes and pays some money called bail to get you out, and then you go back to your protesting usually. And they said, oh. So we drove, and we had our Thanksgiving, and we came back again, and now it was early December. You know, the light dims at about 4 or 5 o'clock, and it was a school night. The next day, Elizabeth was going home from school to a birthday party, and I realized that we didn't have a birthday present yet for the birthday child. And one of our favorite gifts at the time was a gift card from a bookstore. So I said at dinner, honey, when dinner's over, let's just go over the mall and we'll get a book card for your present to give to your friend for the birthday. She said, okay, Mom. So we drove to the mall, we got our gift card, and we're going back to the car. And I'd put Elizabeth in the back seat when I was approached by a stranger. And it was a woman who spoke with a very heavy accent, and her arms were full of a stuffed bear. She had clearly gotten a present for a child. And she explained to me that she just missed her bus that picks up at the mall, and she wondered if I could carry her up Franklin Street, closer to the university, and drop her off so she could catch her bus home. Now, I knew it was another mom, and I was not afraid to give her that ride, so I invited her into the car, and I said to Elizabeth, who'd never seen me pick up a stranger, honey, we're just going to drop this gal closer to the university so she can catch a bus. And we drove down Franklin Street, and we let her off. But I thought I should try and contextualize this somehow for my 6-year-old, and I said, well, honey, I guess I just did my good deed for the day. And she, sitting in the back, said, why do you have to do a good deed for the day, Mom? You remember Elizabeth doesn't like surprises. I said, gosh, I don't know. I guess, in my opinion, that's what makes the world go round. She said, oh. She was quiet a moment, and then she said, some people wouldn't help someone with a different accent or a different skin color. And I said, that's right, Elizabeth. And she said, and then the world stops. I said, yeah. She said, yeah, and when it starts again, you have to keep jumping over that person every time you get to them. I said, uh-huh. And she said, afterward, it gets to be a great big pile because it's all of us. I said, Elizabeth, you're a philosopher. She said, what's that, Mom? And we drove up the driveway, and we're home.
Oh my gosh. Kids, they say the darndest things. That's, oh my gosh, that's freaking awesome. That is so good.
So that she and her sister like that, even to this day, now at 29 and almost 25.
I could do, when you're, adopting the look of your daughter, I can imagine what she looks like and how she.
Well, Elizabeth's picture is actually on the front of Making the Heart Whole Again. She's holding a broken eggshell to the camera.
Oh, that's her?
That's Elizabeth at 6. And
I wondered who that was, because you're on a lot of your covers, aren't you?
in some way, shape, or form, but not always. Sometimes artwork, but yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those are cool stories.
And on the back is a picture of me and Elizabeth and Katie Blake. Let's not forget the amazing Katie Blake Richardson. Let me tell you a tiny little story about Katie. Is that all right?
Yeah, of course it is. You're my guest. Of course, you say whatever you want. Well, within reason.
My kids were born in Southern California and have gone back there for college and to stay whenever they can because they love a palm tree and it makes them exhale. So Katie Blake was 4 years old when my cousin was getting married again, and he invited her to be the flower girl at the wedding. Now, I am a doting mother, and I had a very close friend who was the mother of Katie's oldest friend, and this mother was a gifted seamstress, and I thought, I'm going to make my daughter the dress to wear at the wedding. And so I go with a friend, and I pick out the pattern, and I pick out the fabric, and I'm making this very subtle little dress, and I never asked Katie Blake what her idea was for what she would wear to the wedding. But as we're heading into the wedding weekend, I'm finishing up the dress, and I just had a few more things to put it on. She got up for school, and I put the dress on her, and I said, well, honey, what do you think? And she's been watching me make this dress over play dates, and has had nothing to say. And on this day, she stands in the living room. She goes, I don't like this.
Oh, no.
I don't like this song. I said, Katie Blake, don't you like the dress? She said, no. I said, why didn't you tell me? She said, I was afraid you'd be mad. Now, here at this moment, I had two choices. I could be the Wicked Witch or the Fairy Godmother.
Yeah.
I said, you know what? Let's keep this dress for tea dates together and go to the mall and get you the dress of your dreams. So we went out the door, and we got to the mall, and we bought her a dress with ribbons and frou-frou and lace.
Sequins and sparkles.
And we got back in time to get in the car and drive down to Orange County, California in time for the clock to stop striking 12.
Wow.
And during the wedding, there she is in the dress of her dreams, and she's standing holding her little basket that had flowers in it a minute ago. And she looked at me and said, I love it. So the once in a lifetime chance to go to a special party, the need for a special dress, the stuff of fairy tales.
It is. Oh, that's so true. That's so true. And good for you for being the fairy godmother.
Well, and I was such a bad listener, hadn't said anything to her about what she wanted to start with. Oh, good save, I think.
It's another lesson, right? I mean, it's just like mistakes that we were talking about, right? It's like we made a mistake, we learn from it, and we move on, right? And it's totally. Totally.
So thank you for your forbearance and listening to those stories.
No, well, so we had a similar one. It was similar in so far as my stepmother was making a dress for Perry, my daughter, for my sister's wedding, and sister's wedding, and she's getting all the sizes and everything, and we're kind of like, oh my gosh, because Perry is. She knows what she likes. She's always has. She's a very strong-willed young lady, which is brilliant. And we're just like, oh my gosh, I hope the dress is perfect. And they made her a wand, and it was just this little princess fairy dress because she was like 2 at the time, and she loved it. So talk about like making a little dream come true. She had a dream come true that day for sure. It was excellent. It was excellent. Yeah, you got to look after those little girls.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the boys just need a pile of mud. and
to remember to be good to their hearts.
Yes, yeah, that's true. That's true. So Antonio did say, I love these stories. So good to see you, sister. Delana Reed, you have so many great stories from your children. I love her. Yes, children have really good insights. They don't always have to say anything. Sometimes they just give you a look. Dale says, the wisdom of children indeed makes one wonder. Yeah, right. Well, there's that book that came out in the 90s, I think. Everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. Right. Yeah. Love the stories. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Delana. Andrea, you need to go. And I think...
Thank you for being here, Andrea.
Yes. And I think Milbre probably needs to go because she was just doing that story. Sometimes I sing and doing that presentation, so she's probably a bit knackered, to use a quaint English term.
Indeed. I thought the knacker was the person who gelded the horses. Yeah.
That's basically when you're so tired you want to be killed, or you're almost dead. It's like, that's when you're knackered. It's like you're absolutely, totally, and utterly exhausted. I'm ready to be sent to the knacker's yard. Is when you're knackered.
I see. So not just so the knacker is the person who kills the animal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The knacker is the guy that does the deed. The knacker's yard is where it happens. Mm-hmm. And if you're knackered, it means you're on your way to the yard. Anyway, I'm not dead yet, said Dad. Yes, exactly. None of us are dead yet. Quinn Golden says, thank you both. You're very welcome.
Monty Python. Who would I be without Monty Python? Fairy tales and Monty Python. That's my life right there.
Yeah. There's a lot of lessons to be learned in Monty Python as well. Some of them, yes. Anyway, Milbre, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to just chat and hang out with you. And
I look forward to our an opportunity for me to host you. Simon, we're talking about whether I can have a house concert for him here.
I'd love that. That would be fun. That would be great. Yeah.
Lower East Coast.
So, folks, thank you for being here every Friday. Oh, so I got to show you something very quickly, because next week, because I actually got my act together, we have Martin Shaw.
OMG. That's amazing.
Martin Shaw is going to be joining me. And we're going to be talking about his new book, which just came out.
Courting the Wild Twin? That book?
No, an even more recent book than that. It's called Smoke Hole, Looking to the Wild in the Time of the Spyglass.
Ooh.
Oh, you've got the Wild Twin. That's a great, yeah. So I'm really lucky because yeah, I know. So everything is mirrored for us. So when we go like this, I got it right, so I'm not going to move it. It's right in the money spot. So this isn't the official cover. The official cover is much better, but I got an advanced copy of this because the publisher is in Vermont, and I already chatted with Martin for my podcast. But in this book, he talks about the handless maiden, and people have been talking to me about me telling that story, the handless maiden. Sorry, Mo is trying to get me to let her out of the room. And the other story in this book is the handless maiden and the spyglass. And I want to talk to him about where he got the spyglass, because it's a freaking awesome story. But I also want to talk to him about the handless maiden, because, I think this young woman who loses her hands, she knows to draw chalk around her, right? How does she know that when her parents obviously don't? They didn't teach her these things. They're millers. Right, and her hands grow back. So there's all this.
Plus, her father has given her to the devil. Thank you very much.
Well, right, because he's absolutely scared witless, right?
Oops.
Yes, he's absolutely scared shy of his wits, is what I was going to say.
Oh, nice expression.
Scared shy of his wits. And he protects himself rather than his daughter, right? And so that's why she leaves, because it's like, this place isn't safe, so why would I stay? And off she goes. And it's just, I need to reread this book again within a week, which isn't going to happen, but I can dent into it, because I want to talk to him more about that story as well as about what he does, which he also does these wilderness. I don't want to use the word vision quest, but he takes people out into the wilds of Dartmoor, which is a pretty wild place.
The wilds of Dartmoor.
I know, right? The wilds of Dartmoor. It's a pretty bleak place. It's not, and he helps people find themselves. I mean, that's a lot of what he does is the healing of grief and and getting us reattached to who we really are. And in Courting the Wild Twin, he talks about storytelling is not about enchantment. Enchantment is what we see on the television, on the adverts, on the commercials. And they're trying to, they cast this glimmer over us, or this glamour, right? It puts this glamour over us, to use the original, phrase. And what storytelling does is break the enchantment, and that's what we all should be doing. And I totally agree with him on that. So I'm very, very excited to have him on the show next week. Milbre, it was wonderful having you on the show this week.
Great.
Thank you for joining me and being here. It's always fun hanging out with you, and it was great to, do it again this time.
Ooh, 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 ooh. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
You're very welcome. Thanks all for being here. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.